Good afternoon, and thank you very much for having me here. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you today. So today's event is really about innovation, but before we get into the nitty-gritty of innovation, I'm essentially going to set the scene and talk about the outlook for the world economy after the global financial crisis, and as well as how that relates to Spain and the Basque Country. So the good news is that the global economy continues to recover from recession after governments stepped in during the last few years by running fiscal deficits in order to avoid a global depression. A policy normalization is now taking place. Yet although the financial crisis may be over in technical terms, its consequences for the real economy will be with us for many years. So, in what way will this be visible? Well, my view is that this will mainly show in the differing outlooks between the developed economies on the one hand and the developing economies on the other. Growth in the developed countries on the whole will be weak over the next few years. For example, in the US, in Spain, and in the UK, the process of deleveraging is far from complete. Both households and the public sector remain over-indebted, while the property markets have yet to fully adjust. The public sector in most of these economies will have to retrench in the medium term to bring down the public deficit. This process is necessary after the excesses of the credit boom, but of course it does create the risk of a long period of large output gaps and high unemployment. So if we look at Western Europe, the focus will really be on the continuing Eurozone sovereign debt crisis. Fiscal tightening will continue not only in the distressed peripheral countries, but also in countries such as France, which now have an uncomfortably high debt burden as well. I think the truth is that Eurozone leaders have not yet come to grips with the region's insolvency crisis, as we saw today and yesterday as events unfold in Greece and in Athens. At the Economist Intelligence Unit, we believe that a lasting fix would require an acceptance of the need to restructure the debts of Greece, Ireland, and probably even Portugal. And also for governments to take steps to recapitalize the Eurozone banks which have lent to these governments. The crisis will continue to test the political will of Eurozone members. Nevertheless, we do expect the Eurozone to stay together and for policymakers to eventually allow an orderly, which is the important word, restructure of debt. I think there are exceptions to this trend in Western Europe. For example, Sweden and Germany. They have shown that they can rebound from the crisis very quickly, and I think growth in those economies will continue to be faster than the average. So what about emerging markets then? Well, that's mainly what people talk about these days, where the growth is. And yes, growth will be faster in these markets. After all, they have more favorable demographics, and their public and private balance sheets are much stronger. Their financial sectors are also in much better shape than in the developed world. When we look at regions, Asia will be the fastest growing region, led by China and India. Meanwhile, developments in Latin America look encouraging. In the Middle East and North Africa, it's likely that growth will be a little bit slower than before the financial crisis, as a result largely of political turmoil. And then in Africa, as a whole, the economy is expected to continue to recover. And this is likely to be boosted by capital and investment flows largely coming from Asia, as well as strong commodity prices and rising fiscal spending on the part of governments. I think when you look at the world as a whole, the main idea is that the world is a more uncertain place than before the global financial crisis. Although, the recovery is now in place, there are a number of risks which could mean that the recovery could falter. I think most chiefly among these risks are, of course, the Eurozone debt crisis and the risk of a disorderly restructuring of debt, which would impact financial sectors not just in Europe, but all over the world. Then there is the risk of oil prices remaining at a very high level, and then also another risk of the Chinese economy, which is growing very quickly, facing a hard landing. But on the whole, we expect the global recovery to continue, although it will probably be at a more moderate pace. So what does this mean for Spain? Well, I think everyone in this room is very well aware of the challenges that Spain faces. The economy exited recession in the first half of 2010 and is now growing slowly. Like many developed economies, Spain will continue to have to correct the imbalances that accumulated in the economy up to 2008. Most significant of which include over-indebted consumers and a still significant, although declining, current account deficit, as well as a banking system that is in the midst of reforms. All this means is that although growth has begun very slowly, it's likely to remain weak, and unfortunately unemployment will remain very high. Now, it might be a cliche to say this, but there is truth in the now well-known phrase that a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. I believe Spain has little option but to look for new opportunities to grow. And in this way, exports are very important. Spain needs to grasp the nettle and make changes, even if uncomfortable, in the economy so that in the future it can grow at a higher rate again and in a more sustainable manner. More reforms will have to be made in the labor market. Education still needs to be improved. Bureaucracy could be reduced further. And in the context of today's focus, the culture of innovation also needs to change so that entrepreneurship and innovation is more supported and accepted across Spain. So finally, how does this relate to the Basque Country? Well, in order to alleviate investor concerns and rebalance its economy, Spain has to become more export-oriented and innovative. I think the good news is that given the structure of the Basque economy, the Basque economy is well placed to be an important player in this new drive for growth. So to sum up then, I just want to highlight the three main points that I've discussed. Firstly, that the consequences of the financial crisis will be with us for many years, most obviously in terms of low growth and high unemployment in the developed world, but also that emerging markets, they offer more opportunities for higher growth. I think secondly, given Spain's economic and fiscal position, it has no choice but to look for new opportunities to grow. And I think export-oriented growth needs to be a key component of this. And finally, that the Basque region is well placed to take advantage of this momentum and search for new growth.